Hi, I'm Dr. Jason J. Campbell, and I want to thank you for taking the time to watch my videos. In this video, I'm continuing my ongoing analysis into Friedrich Nietzsche's Will to Power. I'm using the Walter Kaufmann translation, as you guys know. The section that I'm going to be covering is section 13.2 in my notes. It's at the bottom of page 75 in the PDF. In order to access the PDF, which I've just updated, so make sure you get the latest copy, just click the link in the description field. It'll take you to the PDF, download it, and follow along. Okay, so let's begin with the section. I'm going to be drinking coffee as I do the series because it's 7 o'clock in the morning, and I'm starting my day with you guys doing Nietzsche, so give me a second. Alright, so this is going to be Nietzsche's Will to Power. This is going to cover section 13.2. It covers notes 431 through 447. Okay, so this is Socrates and the problem of happiness, right? So this is Socrates, the section is Socrates, and the problem of happiness. This should prove to be a very interesting section. So let's begin with a quote from Nietzsche. This comes directly out of the text. At the bottom of page 75, the last two lines, Nietzsche says, quote, "I tried to understand from what partial and idiosyncratic states the Socratic problem derives. His equalization of reason equals virtue equals happiness." Right? So we have reason equals virtue equals happy, H-A-P-P-I-N. So reason equals virtue equals happiness. Top of page 76. It was with this absurdity of a doctrine of identity, right? So this is the doctrine of identity, according to Nietzsche. Doctrine of identity is with the absurdity of a doctrine of identity that he fascinated. The philosophers of antiquity never again freed themselves from this fascination. So the question is, we need to figure out what this fascination is, right? We need to figure out what this fascination is. When the spirit is rich and independent, it must resist any preoccupation with morality. Okay, so the idea here is, well, twofold. One, we need to recognize what the doctrine of identity is, and it's not a formalized concept per se, but Nietzsche is saying that the relationship, the identity relationship between reason and virtue and happiness is one that is inherently Platonic, right? Plato sets out to create this doctrine of identity, as he calls it. With respect to the notion of the doctrine of identity, Nietzsche then says, once it's introduced, philosophers since then have been obsessed with this. And actually it's the two parts, right? It's first this idea of virtue, which really gets formalized in Aristotle. And it really has its roots in Aristotle. So this idea of virtue, we believe then, says Nietzsche, that once I am rational, I recognize that my reason is the means towards happiness. And Nietzsche wants to categorically deny this, right? He wants to state, having read Nietzsche, having read Schopenhauer, and recognizing that much of this results in pessimism. Me personally, having read Mills and recognizing that there is no necessary guarantee towards happiness just because you have reason. In fairness to the tradition, there's a recognition that it's an equivocation at best, right? It's problematic to say that reason is in itself a sufficient condition for happiness, right? Nietzsche wants to deny that fact. But the idea that your reason is the means in which you attain happiness is a very intoxicating supposition. So let's look at the first point, right? So the fascination becomes that reason is the means, right? Reason becomes the means with which we attain happiness. Right? Reason becomes the mean with which we attain happiness, and all too often this is false. So number one, the dialectic process made a, quote, tyrant of shrewdness. And we know what this means, right? The dialectic process for Nietzsche made a tyrant of shrewdness. How does this work? Typically you'll have the following, right? Within the Platonic, we're talking specifically about Plato's dialogues and Socrates as represented in Plato's dialogues. So typically you'll have Socrates as the interlocutor with some figure, usually someone of note, right? We'll say character X. And character X is a specialist. S-P-E-C-I-A-L-I-S-T. They could be a specialist in art, a specialist in justice, a specialist in military tactics, a specialist in piety, a specialist in what have you, right? Socrates typically finds himself in the, not always, but typically finds himself in the Platonic dialogues discussing, piety with the priest, discussing justice with the general, discussing what have you, right? This exchange, this dialectic exchange, right? This dialectic exchange, Socrates typically takes the role of, the term is gadfly, right? Socrates plays the role of the gadfly. He's, insofar as he's the interlocutor, he wears this mask, if you will, of shrewdness, right? I don't really purport to know. I'm engaged in a discussion, a dialectical exchange with someone who does purport to know, and I prod that person, right? Hey, let me know a little bit more. Hey, let me know a little bit more. Hey, let me know a little bit more. And what Socrates does, and this is how we really see the philosophical method evolve, hence the Socratic method evolve, is that based on what the individual engaged in discourse with Socrates says, Socrates starts to draw contradictions in what they say. Well, you said this first, but since you said this, don't you say that this can't follow? But you said that does follow. How does it? It doesn't make sense, right? So, in a sense, this idea that Socrates is the gadfly, challenging the specialist, results in making, as Nietzsche says, a tyrant out of shrewdness, right? There is a sense in which his it's first thing in the morning, so my brain hasn't kicked in yet. His shrewdness, there is no other way to really put it. His shrewdness is masked by, and masks this notion of his philosophical aggressiveness, if you will, right? He makes a tyrant out of shrewdness. Now, with respect to this idea of happiness, the happiness, and I'm jumping ahead here a little bit, the happiness that's derived, if we want to, and I'm starting really slow, right? The happiness that's derived is a satisfaction of the method, right? So that this idea that we derive happiness from our reason is really, we'll see in a little bit, is really derived from the satisfaction we have by justifying and validating the method, reason, right? It isn't this happiness that we have physically, right? It becomes this happiness that we derive out of satisfaction of the method. Think for, if you will, the scene in Matrix 2 where the architect is speaking with Neo in that room where it's just images of Neo everywhere. And the architect talks about the mathematical precision, and he's like, it's just, the way he talks about, you can tell he's engrossed with the method, with the system, with the harmony of the system, and the one bit of the system that drives him mad, the architect, that is the anomaly, Neo. It's like that, right? Socrates really is, in Plato Socrates, is the architect in that scene. He's enamored with the harmony, methodological harmony of the system, right? The system is, he introduces himself to the specialist and then begins to deconstruct the contradictions from his discussion with the specialist. And it's that method, that power, really, and we'll get to this in a second, that power of being able to analyze and formalize and identify contradiction that he he becomes engrossed